The year is 1844, the opening of Japan's borders to the west and the start of the Bakumatsu period is less than a decade away. It is here Japan faces a crisis. The power of the shogun's sadistic half-brother, Matsudaira Naritsugu, is on the rise. With Naritsugu destined to take up a prominent role as counsel to the shogun, many fear his cruel and unusual taste for violence and death will have a negative effect on the country's stability. In face of this looming threat, a plot is hatched in the shadows to assassinate Naritsugu before he can ascend to his new influential position. This is the premise of 13 Assassins, a story which, although fictional, is still a riveting tale of honor, justice, intrigue, and bloodshed, rooted in history. "13 Assassins" was originally a jidaigeki, or period film, from 1963, directed by Eiichi Kuro. However, the version which has become far more famous in recent years has been that of Takashi Miike's 2010 remake, which brings over much of the same story. Takashi Miike has over the years become a prominent force in the Japanese film industry, with such films as Audition, Ichi the Killer, and Gozu, just to name a few. And although he is best known for his work in the horror genre, he has also made a number of kids' movies and video game adaptations, as well as some remakes of older films such as Kudo's 13 Assassins and Kobayashi's Harakiri. Now, if you have seen my review of the original Harakiri from 1962, a film which I strongly believe to be one of, if not the greatest samurai film of all time, you'd know that I'm not a fan of Miike's 2011 remake, titled instead Harakiri: Death of a Samurai. However, I don't hold the same fondness for the original 13 Assassins, which until recently has been a difficult film to track down and watch. My primary experience with this story came from Miike's remake, which I originally saw back when I was in high school. And to be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of it at the time. As a kid who grew up on Kurosawa samurai films, watching a modern jidaigeki was definitely a step out of my comfort zone, and was perhaps influential in making me a bit more apprehensive about modern samurai cinema. A feeling which would only continue after watching Miike's version of Harakiri a few years later. But I do know that Miike's version of 13 Assassins is a widely beloved film, and I have received numerous requests to review it over the years. Yet, as I usually do, I have waited until we were closer to its setting in history in my main series. And well, we are at last approaching this time now in my Edo Period series. As you may know, I've recently taken a brief break from the Edo Period series, being that we are around the halfway point now, and I wanted to go back and update some older videos which you may have seen, but trust me, I will be coming back to finish things off with the incoming Bakumatsu period and Bushin War. Things which are looming just over the horizon in the film 13 Assassins. So I figured, why not take the time now to give the film a proper review? Right away, I have to say that when I revisited it, I really enjoyed this film way more than I thought I would. I was worried that I was going to have the same complaints I did years ago, but I was happily surprised by how much more I was invested in the story. Looking back, I think one of my biggest complaints I had at the time were the massive differences between classic samurai cinema and a modern samurai film, which is kind of funny considering a lot of people and articles want to compare this film to Kurosawa. This is starting to become an annoying trope where it seems like every piece of samurai media has to be compared to Kurosawa or harken back to Kurosawa in some way, like Ghost of Tsushima's Kurosawa mode. And specifically in terms of 13 Assassins, I really don't get the Kurosawa comparisons at all, to be honest, besides some cinematography which is pretty well done. I mean, sure, you could say it is similar to Seven Samurai with its plot points of a small, skilled team of samurai taking on a larger force of enemies, but similar plot points to only one of Kurosawa's movies doesn't automatically make it feel like Kurosawa, at least to me. Other than that, it's definitely a modern samurai film, and personally I would never say it feels like Kurosawa. But perhaps that was my problem when I was younger. I think I probably was too enamored by Kurosawa's samurai films and was naively caught off guard by the style of 13 Assassins, which ended up ruining my engagement of it at the time. And while I do still have some gripes about the action, which we'll get into later, I have to say that this time around I was much more enthralled by the story. Maybe it's just because I'm older now and have experienced way more samurai films, or perhaps it's just how my taste in movies has changed over time, but I am happy to say that I liked 13 Assassins a lot. So, with that all said, let's talk about it. And yes, there will be spoilers ahead in this review if you have yet to see 13 Assassins. As I explained at the start of this video, the story centers around what to do about the sadistic Matsudaira Naritsugu, who in the story is the half-brother of the shogun. This is sort of true, but the story makes them appear more closely related than they really were. In real history, Naritsugu had been wed to Asahime, the sister of Shogun Tokugawa Ieyoshi, so he was in fact not really a half-brother, but a brother-in-law. Also, what's important to mention about the real history is that he was not known to have been a cruel and ruthless figure like how he is portrayed in the film, and instead died suddenly in 1835 at the age of 24, 9 years before the film takes place. This is all you need to know in order to understand that this story is obviously historical fiction and is just using the figure of Naritsugu, who died young and unexpectedly, as a convenient real historical figure as its villain. Goro Inagaki plays the role of Naritsugu very well. He is made out to be an irredeemable monster, often displaying little to no emotion while he murders, tortures, rapes, and mutilates his victims. He uses the excuse that he feels he has the power to freely do so as a member of the warrior class, as living in an age of peace, he is stuck trying to find ways to satisfy his insatiable bloodlust. He also desires the country to once again be at war with itself, such as during the Sengoku period, an age he fantasizes over due to its famed death and destruction. This is made more evident later in the story during the assassination attempt on him, where he does not fear his life being at stake, but rather is exhilarated by all the killing going on around him, exclaiming that it was one of the best days in his whole life. Naritsugu is a deeply disturbing individual with absolutely no care or respect for the lives of those around him, and after a specific incident involving the Makino family, there are those within the Bakufu who are at a crossroads about what to do regarding him. This is where another real historical figure, Doi Toshitsura, comes in. Toshitsura was for a time in real history a Roju, or senior counselor within the Bakufu. The story uses Toshitsura as someone acting in the shogun's best interests, aiming to remove the threat of Naritsugu before he is to receive an upcoming promotion, which would give him far more reaching and devastating influence. Toshitsura enlists the aid of our main protagonist, Shimada Shinzaemon, played by Koji Yakusho, who is asked to gather a small band of trusted samurai who, for the good of the nation, will carry out a mission to assassinate Naritsugu. There is one problem, however, that of Kito Hanbei, played by Masachika Ichimura. Kito is one of Naritsugu's top retainers, who learns of the plot and begins taking countermeasures to prevent it. What adds to the drama, though, is that both Kito and Shinzaemon are old rivals from their sword school. Thus, a delicate chess match begins to unfold as both men try to outmaneuver the other. I love the intrigue this creates, as both of them have a personal stake now in the situation, besides just carrying out their duty. This all builds up to a final duel between the two, which has a ton of weight behind it. And side note, it's also fun to mention that both of these actors have played Tokugawa Ieyasu in some iconic performances, so it's awesome to see them here squaring off against each other. Anyways, throughout the story, of course, Shinzaemon is able to recruit his small group of assailants, which by the end number at 13. It is here they orchestrate a plot to strike at Naritsugu while he is traveling between domains, trapping him and his entourage in a small village turned death trap. This is where all the action goes down in a massive epic spectacle, as the 13 assassins face off against not a small retinue of bodyguards as they were expecting, but instead a large force of some 200 samurai whom Hanbei called up in anticipation of a potential attack by Shinzaemon. It is a bloodbath and very entertaining. However, I have to say it does go a bit over the top for me. Now, I know this might be expected with a director like Miike, but there are just a number of weird moments that took me out of the action. And I apologize because this whole section is going to sound like me complaining and nitpicking, but these are details I do want to discuss, especially if you are someone like me who wants a more realistic and grounded story. For one, early on they utilized bombs and archers from rooftops to whittle down the enemy forces, yet at some point they just stop, throw down their bows, and hop into the horde of enemy troops with their swords drawn. I do not get this. They show that each assassin still has more arrows to use, and later reveal plenty of more bombs and flammable traps that can be utilized. Why not exhaust all of that before jumping in with your swords? Because then what it turns into is a frantic whirlwind of blades as the assassins easily cut through most of the other samurai around them. Now, I will say, there is a reason for this they explain quite well earlier, talking about how in this era of peace, most samurai don't know how to use their swords as well anymore. Yet, based on stamina alone, you have to heavily suspend your disbelief at their ability to cut down many other samurai so easily. And I think the scene that really threw me off, and honestly I feel the same way about it now as I did when I first saw it, was a particular moment when one of the assassins, Kujuro Hirayama, has this showdown in an alley filled with fire and swords planted in the dirt all around him. I get it, it's supposed to remind you how badass this character is supposed to be, but instead of thinking, wow, this is cool, all I could think about was where the hell did they get all those swords, because they certainly did not carry them there as we saw. Additionally, and this really isn't a gripe, but more of something I just noticed, it's hard to care about all the assassins. Sure, you might form an attachment to a few of them, but to be honest, it was difficult to find investment in all of them. This means that as they start to get cut down one by one, although it was a bummer since I was rooting for them, I really didn't care much overall. I wouldn't call this a problem with the movie, however, seeing as I know you can only do so much with the runtime of a film. Unless the movie was 3 hours long, like The Fellowship of the Ring, and we had time to get thoroughly acquainted with each character, it is difficult. It also didn't help that when they got into the thick of it, it was hard to tell a number of them apart from one another, as they were all wearing the same clothing and had the same chonmage hairstyle. So this, in addition to the over-the-top action, are things which caused the end battle to not hit as hard for me as I would have liked. Still, like I said before, it is big, it is epic, and it still is a good time. Anyways though, I don't want to get too sidetracked. Those were really the only major complaints I had about the film after revisiting it. However, one thing I do want to touch more on is another great positive in the film. As addressed a few minutes ago, they touched on the idea that samurai were losing touch with their warrior identity during the peaceful Edo period. This is true, and it's great to see them focus on it. It's something that is also highlighted in the film Harakiri, how samurai, although warriors, were now existing in an age of peace, when their role in society had greatly changed. In the build-up to the end confrontation, this concept is repeatedly returned to, how most samurai were either now bureaucrats or had given up their status, since there were not many opportunities for samurai who had become ronin or masterless. Indeed, the whole idea of joining up as one of the assassins is really only meant to reward each man with a fitting death as a warrior. They knew their mission was going to be a one-way trip, and that it was not likely any of them would survive. This is something that Shinzaemon himself is particularly eager for, dying in service of a just cause. This mission is one they all undertook, knowing that it was likely going to be the last thing in life they would do. Yet, to be a samurai in the Edo period, and in particular, a samurai whose identity and core values were intertwined with his warrior role, there is perhaps no greater end to achieve. So, this was an awesome element in the story which I was happy to see them discuss. So often I think that aspect of the Edo period is ignored in stories or even just pop culture. But it's important to remember that just because the samurai ruled the country did not mean they had been able to maintain their warrior roots in an age of relative peace. Now, the last thing I do want to touch on is how the film is presented. What is the editing, cinematography, and music like? Overall, I was very pleased with these aspects too. The cinematography itself was very artfully crafted and purposeful, lingering on characters to see their expressions, holding wide shots to give a better sense of surroundings, and closing in during moments of intense chaos while also pulling back to give us a clear view of the situation. Well done. And I have to say, the editing too was great. It did not feel like there were any pacing issues or abruptness, as I've noticed in some other recent samurai films. One thing though is that, although the music was fine, I don't think it was memorable at all. There are a lot of samurai films with fantastic scores, but here I don't think I can recall too much at all. Obviously this means nothing is bad about the music, but also nothing is great either. Perhaps watching the film yet another time will allow me to focus more in on the music and help me find some hidden gems. So, with that all said, what would I rate 13 Assassins? In the end, at this point in time, I would give 13 Assassins 3.5 stars out of 4. Now, I actually had debated dropping it down to 3 or maybe 2.5 stars out of 4, but I just didn't feel it was right going that low. So what it comes down to is 1 solid star for the excellent plot, a half star for the editing and music due to the music not being too memorable, another full star for the characters, being that Shinzaemon, Kito, and Naritsugu are so good, even with the lack of being able to explore many of the assassins in depth. And then lastly we have historical accuracy, which I decided to give another full star. This one I was debating only giving half a star to, being that they did tweak a bunch of stuff from real history, yet given their great focus on the shifting role of the samurai in the Edo period, I felt I had to give it a full star for this category as well. If I were to lower my rating at all, it would have to do with the complaints I had about the final confrontation. But really, I think that gets more into personal preference, and I don't have a good way of taking points off for that unless I wanted to downgrade the categories of characters and historical accuracy. I'm not sure. This was definitely one of the most difficult ratings I've had to do, which honestly makes sense given my history with the film. Regardless though, 13 Assassins is a great time, and I'm happy that my opinion of it has gotten so much better after finally revisiting it. It's a film I 100% recommend checking out to the few of you who have yet to see it. Honestly, I'm a bit upset I had not checked it out again sooner. Or maybe it is good that I waited. Who knows? Yet, I am very curious to hear your thoughts. I know a lot of people really like this movie, so I'd like to hear from you now. Are you one of the many who love this film, or do you have some problems with it like I did? I'd very much like to hear what you have to say in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.